I want to talk about why this project, in my eyes, is significant on a couple of different points. The first is the supposition that Lazaris makes, which is we're not a teacher, we're not a guru, we're not a god. We've moved beyond those levels, meaning maybe one time we were a teacher, a guru, and a god. Now we're more than that. We're your friend. And Lazaris has gone to great lengths to explain what is and isn't control, what is and isn't responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond. And I think this is a really healthy exploration of what words mean. But Lazaris has avoided defining what they mean by the word friend. Now, whenever you have an absence of data in a traumatized cult that needs to know, the meaning is filled in with assumption and with projection. And it's very rarely what the other person means. So when Lazaris says we're your friend, it's very likely, in the absence of filling in what does that mean and not mean exactly, it's very likely that there are 1,000 different expectations or versions of that, because we've got to file that word away somewhere as meaning something. Otherwise, it's gibberish. So Lazaris is a friend. What does that mean? Well, if one is talking with an enlightened being who claims to be creating universe in their spare, non-existent time, my expectation of friend is of a higher order, a higher quality of friendship than, Joe Blow met down at the video store, than, a typical, Facebook friend. Let's be friends. And Lazaris has not defined exactly what their commitment is and is not, other than to love eternally. But, Lazaris has said in the definition of love, it is to reduce the fear of loss. But the concept synergy user agreement increases the fear of loss by stating that it can and does unilaterally block people off from Lazaris for not complying with this or that, including some extraordinary claims, such as if you say the word Lazaris or the Lazaris material, which we've trademarked, without our written consent, we may cut you off from Lazaris. So it seems like there is a contrast between Lazaris's definition of love, his statement of loving indefinitely or eternally, and Lazaris's choice to use a monopoly publisher that cuts off access. Whether it's cutting people off from Lazaris events, which I was told was the purpose of the security guard that I questioned in San Francisco. Why are you there? I've never seen a security guard at a New Age event. Well, there's always a first, and that was Concept Synergy's hired security guard. I said, why are you here? He said, I have a list of people who may want to attend this event, and my job is to keep them out of the event. And so, is there a rift between Concept Synergy and Lazaris? If so, would the best practice be to disclose that rift or to cover it up? Well, what tends to work better to resolving tensions like that? Covering it up and hiding it, or going out into the open? Now, if you have the ability to create universes in whatever is the equivalent of your spare time, you certainly have the ability, if not the willingness, to channel through more than one person. You can say, you know what, Jach and Concept Synergy, they're free to make their choices to control this and do that, but that's not really the commitment that we made to our friends. And so we're going to channel in this other place, and we'll let it be known that if that channel starts controlling access in any way that's inconsistent with our commitment, that we will just channel somewhere else. And that's our commitment to you, to use our ability and willingness to respond to the fears and controls, etc., of our channels if they come up, but still deliver on our promise to you, or we're not going to make the promise. And Lazaris is not doing that. Now, if one listens to Barbara Brannon, Terry Clancy, Bill Brown, and use the filter of basic psychological data and theory, or the filter of the Lazaris tapes on love or understanding or whatever it is, it's very clear that neither Bill Brown, Barbara Brannon, Terry Clancy, and those are only the employees that I've talked with. I've talked briefly with Gail Roberts. She's honoring her non-disclosure agreement, but her partner, Chris Brown, certainly is fuming about various things and doesn't have an NDA, and has plenty to say about what they don't like about Concept Synergy. If 100% of the former employees that I've encountered of Lazaris, many of them who have been there for decades, do not feel safe, do not feel cared about, do not feel respected, do not feel treated well, and are being controlled through the vehicle of non-disclosure agreements, being extorted as a condition for a small settlement of, I don't know what the exact amount is. We'll give you $10,000 and off you go, but you don't get it unless you promise not to tell anyone what happened. That is nowhere near the definition that I would have for a friendship. And so if Lazaris is not going to fill in that word, what does it mean that he's a friend? Does it mean that he sticks up for staffers of Concept Synergy? Or does it mean he stays silent? Well, my basic tenet of friendship is sticking up for reasonable rights of the other person, and to understanding their feelings and also empowering them to talk about it. Because one of the most important things, if there is a conflict, is being able to express it and bring awareness to it. Because, first of all, it's a learning opportunity. Anyone who witnesses the conflict between past or current employees and Jach Pursel, there's value there. And one of the values is the question, is the Lazaris relationship material effective at resolving abuse or conflicts? And if it is effective, then why is it not being used? And if it's not effective for Jach and concept synergy and employees that have been treated poorly, in their own opinion and in my opinion, and I think, if one was to hire an HR ethicist and say, what would best practice look like for this, 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 and this, and then what actually went on, and concept synergy ranks lower than Zappos, lower than Tesla, lower in terms of former employees. For example, the employees I've heard interviewed at Tesla, some are critical about this or that or the other, and many are favorable, and it's a very popular place to work. But I don't think anyone is being bound up and told they can't talk about their experiences. So it's important to me because the friendship that Lazaris promises to Barbara, Terry Clancy, Bill Brown is the same template of friendship Lazaris is promising to me and everyone else. Now, if that template, meaning it's whatever it is Lazaris is saying he's doing, which he's not defining, if that template consists of standing by and allowing or enabling abuses without speaking up about them, is that a useful friend? Meaning, the reason we want a friend is that a friend is viewed as someone who's going to bring more well-being. If a friend is going to enable trauma and misery in your life, none of us would want friends because it just cross-wires the definition. If a friend is going to always tell you the truth, going to advocate for good win-win relationships, going to point out and say, hey, I'm not going to sanction this, well, then everyone wants a friend if they want to be involved in an ethical enterprise where more people win. Similarly, another big reason that this matters for me is both in my own life and in my observation at Lazaris events, there is a lot of uncertainty, confusion, hesitation, shame, and pain around the fact that many Lazaris friends are poor, meaning they're not particularly thrilled about their job. They've got credit card debt. They're not particularly wealthy. Some of them deeply regret, they're spending lots of money on crystals. And they feel there's something wrong with them. And one of the bases for that is Lazaris saying it's easier to succeed than it is to fail. And talking about the fact that the only reason we don't, have it all and stuff is we have some payoffs and negative beliefs. But otherwise, we can be filthy rich, whatever it is, etc. And so what are all these payoffs that I have that, I'm not succeeding even as well as, someone out in more of the consensus reality? Donald Trump has more money than I do. What's going on here? And the levels of abuse in our culture are such that we produce, in general, and this is more so than not in the domain of sensitives, meaning in our population there's 10 to 20% of the population that is unusually neurologically sensitive. And Elaine Aron has done biological studies in this. That tends to be more of the group that is interested in metaphysics and inner development. It's also a group that, statistically speaking, is marginalized and does poorly. Meaning if you take 100 highly sensitive people in the United States, you will find that a majority of them are experiencing more pain, more shame, more stress, and lower income than the average person. And a very small minority outperform the majority because the sensitives that manage to kind of work around the handicap of working in an insensitive environment that's attuned to the majority, it's not attuned to them. These individuals can do extremely well if they're able to tailor the environment, and attune to their sensitivity. But a majority of them are not doing well. They're in more pain than the average person. And whether that's financial pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, physical pain, they're in more pain. Now, my impression is that a lot of the Lazaris friends would show up if they filled out the HSP filter, which you can go to HSP test and see for yourself, are you on that list? I am. And a lot of the pain that I deal with is the intersection of being highly sensitive in an insensitive environment. Now, if that's a good chunk of the Lazaris demographic, and the statistic is that rather rationally, if you're unusually sensitive, you could think just in the audio example, let's just say you have very acute hearing. Well, then you go into a bar and it's going to be painful because it's a cacophony of too much noise. You go to a rock concert, it's going to be painful because it's too loud for your ears. You're in traffic and honking and it's uncomfortable. Now, that's just common sense. But what's the solution in terms of if Lazaris does not change that statistic in any way, but caters to more sensitive people who are in more pain than normal. And sensitive people are shamed more culturally than normal, in part because sensitivity is on the feminine continuum and we're in a chauvinistic cult. So for Lazaris to say it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, and one to look in around that. Sensitives tend to look inward. It's similar to women. When women are in pain, they're more likely to harm themselves. When men are in pain, they're more likely to harm other people, statistically speaking. And the same is true with sensitives. Sensitives are more likely to be shamed and to shame themselves. Than non-sensitives, and they're more likely to be in more pain. And so there's a lot of questioning and examining of what's going on in the room and what's here, and so is experiencing this and so is experiencing that. And this focus on you create your own reality, i.e., all you sensitive people, you've created this insensitive reality. Well, how is that useful in terms of doing something about that? Are you able to tune down the noise of the bars now that you've grasped this important truth? Are you able to feel included if all the ways to connect are loud parties? Like, how do you deal with this now that you know that you create your own reality? And a majority of people don't. They don't figure out how to deal with that. But the words, it's easier to figure out how to deal with it and succeed than it is to fail. But you're not doing it because of your payoffs and your negative ego. It falls too close to a self-referential dogma that has no recourse. Now, if you look at Scientology or NXIVM or any of the cults out there, one of the things they all have in common is a self-referential dogma. And the self-referential dogma says, this works, we're the best. I mean, you kind of have to say that, because if you say we're the worst, who's going to join? So we're the best. That's the only legitimate reason to join us. I mean, work here, we're second class. Listen to our material, it's not as good as Eckhart Tolle's. It doesn't make sense. So there is, in any group that gains traction, there's someone there saying this is better than the rest, otherwise why join? Why learn something new if it's worse than the status quo? So there's that. This is the best, learn from us. And then there's the statement, if you do this and this and this, you'll see for yourself. And then when it doesn't work, a certain percentage of the time, the message is not, we don't know what we're doing, and that's why it doesn't work. The message is, you did it wrong. Oh no, there's the dark shield, but there's a dark law beneath the dark shield. Oh, there's this, and then there's this as well. Sometimes when you didn't do that, then you didn't do this as well. Come to our next series and we'll show you how to do that. The belief that you did this and this and that, when you came to the first event, just learn your payoffs and then go to the room of belief and it'll change. Or do your 33-second technique, and if you wanted it, you'll get it. Oh, you didn't get it. Well, you didn't do it good enough. Well, that's going to get boring after a while. Well, we didn't get around to telling you, come to our next event and you can learn all about the dark shield and the this and the that. And then, if you do that properly, then it'll sort out. But Lazaris friends for decades have gone to this one and that one and this one and that one, and some of them are just as broke as they were, or more broke, because they purchased crystals at 1,000% markup, something that someone in the consensus might have put into a 401k or an IRA or that type of thing. And then to be told that it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, and you're just not doing it good enough, is what makes it a self-referential dogma. Meaning we make no mistakes. And so L. Ron Hubbard, no mistakes. NXIVM leader, no mistakes. Sex with children, no, it's just misunderstood. 10 lovers, bullying this, doing, no mistakes. And of course, shame-based parents, superhuman parents, no mistakes. And the message is that when the leadership can't or doesn't make any mistakes, is that it's the fault of the follower, it's the fault of the child. When Rajneesh flew off back to India, his followers weren't loyal enough. There was this young Indian lover who he seduced at like age 16 or so, and who was loyally with him for like 20, 30 years, setting up the U.S. base and assigned all these jobs she had no training for. But when things went south, Rajneesh didn't say, you know what? I enabled a foreign girl in her 20s to set up a country, in effect. And surprise, surprise, she didn't know what she was doing. Amazing. Here I did. I picked her. She had zero experience in business, zero, college degree in this, zero training in intersection with culture, and I sent her to America, and she didn't set up my company. And you can watch this on the Wild West, great series. You hear him, seething as if he wishes she would commit suicide, and she's ruined his great teaching. It's not his mistake. Rajneesh couldn't possibly have hired a competent team of, local networkers and lawyers and stuff to do all of this. No. I'm going to give this to a young, experienced girl, and then I'm going to blame her for my stupidity. And then ask her to commit suicide. It's all her fault. This is a self-referential, dogmatic cult. We're not taking surveys and saying, gee, you all went to the last workshop and racked up another 1,000 in credit card debt. How many of you have made more money since the last Lemurian event? And what's the difference that you're doing? Are you doing difference in beliefs, or are you climbing the corporate ladder? What are you doing that's making that difference? And the belief is that I haven't figured it out, but Jach has. He's making millions falling asleep. It is easier to succeed than it is to fail, right? All he does is fall asleep. That's easier than walking around all day, and he's succeeding. But is he? And what are his relationships like? Well, let's hide that with NDAs. So the why I think it's so important that Terry and Barbara and Bill Brown actually break an abuse contract, tear up the contract of shame with the abuser and say, here's what it was like for me, is in part breaking the dogmatic abuse cycle that's blaming and shaming, indirectly or directly. I expressed some anger at Lazaris one time on the forum, and I was told basically to go take a hike for a year until what? What is an adolescent being abused by their parents, listening to the fact that they create it all and that Lazaris is their friend, but Lazaris isn't enough of a friend to do anything about that abuse dynamic other than to say, you're creating it all. What is an adolescent to feel? But shame, hurt, and anger. Any psychologist can tell you that. But if that's a recipe for those feelings, and those feelings are not welcome on the forum because they cast a shadow of doubt or skepticism on the idea that if we do these techniques and workshops, then we'll live in this wonderful new age, then where do those feelings go? Well, they end up here, being voiced in an environment that concept synergy can't shut down. But how does concept synergy respond to this? By stonewalling. And so here you get the enemy dynamic. Here's where data becomes the enemy in a dogmatic reality. Scientologists are forced to cut off from their families. You're forced to leave concept synergy if you advocate for decent treatment, ultimately getting fired as Barbara Brannon was, for her position on getting retirement benefits. But why is it that Google can offer retirement benefits, but the publisher of the greatest material in the history of humanity, publishing The Elegance of Abundance, and that it's easier to succeed than it is to fail, but we can't pay our staff well? How do we deal with that? See, that question has to be dealt with by every Lazaris friend who doesn't see a connection between doing this and doing this and doing this and how their life is working, or doesn't even necessarily see a correlation between their life and someone who isn't working with Lazaris but works at Google and doing just fine in this or that ambition. So how does that fit together? In a dogmatic self-referential circle, the only thing taboo is to question the teacher, the leader, the power structure, the parent, whatever, the government. That's off limit. In totalitarian states where people are deleted and just can't travel or whatever, in totalitarian forums where people just, they shared an opinion and banished, the one taboo is questioning the deity. But every system is flawed. Every point of data will show you that. The smartest people on the planet, Elon Musk is incredibly brilliant in many, many ways. And he's the first to say that what we're putting out is a little less crummy than before. We're never going to get it right, but we're going to get it right better than we did last month and better than that. And it'll keep getting better. It'll never be perfect. But we'll keep innovating. And we made a dumb choice over here, and we did this. The smartest people acknowledge, the endless mistakes, and they double down and work harder. But does concept synergy make mistakes? Do they talk about them? Does Lazaris make mistakes, and does he apologize when he misdiagnoses someone's fatal illness? Does he say, you know what? We made a mistake. First of all, we shouldn't be talking about this because we're not a doctor and we don't have license. And then secondly, the creator of universes got it wrong. An MRI gave you a better thing than all of our esoteric knowledge. Maybe we should just be referring you to take an MRI rather than dishing out medical information. Now, concept synergy manages that situation behind the scenes, and, but this happened sometime, we're really sorry, and thanks for telling us, but they don't tell the public. In other words, you're not going to learn from concept synergy all the times Lazaris got medical information wrong. So when you ask Lazaris for a medical diagnosis of some kind or another, you're going to think that the creator of universes and the highest resonance to ever touch the bound to be better than an MRI. But you're not going to have the data. And one of the reasons you're not going to have the data is the non-disclosure agreements. And another is that Jach and the entire Concept Synergy staff does not have the ethical backbone to say, we want you to know that regardless of what Lazaris says, we've seen data that says this is by no means a perfect system. And in fact, if you're responsible, if you're a doctor and you're trying to show that washing your hands before and sterilizing your instrument, you do protocols, you do a series of tests. So an ethical organization would keep records of every time Lazaris has issued a medical assessment, and it would ask people to back that up and learn what happened. And then they would present the statistical data. They'd say Lazaris is wrong, 15% of the time? 30% of the time? What is it? What percentage of the time, when Lazaris gives you an important medical advice from the highest priority relationship in your spirituality, your only priority, that's going to be wrong, and your life will be harmed if you believed that, versus if you got it checked out and got a second opinion. Well, if one person's life is ruined because they thought Lazaris is bound to know this, and Lazaris didn't point out in the session, by the way, we're wrong 15% of the time, go check it out. What's the impact and what's the responsibility for that? So the why is, if you've been, first of all, this kind of split reality produces schizophrenia. So to believe all of this stuff, but look at all of the anomalies. Lazaris says this and we're selling this tape, but you're hearing as a concept synergy staffer about this and about that and about this and about that. You've got a split reality. They don't match up. This produces schizophrenia because it is schizophrenic. The most luminous this, medical misdiagnosis. The elegance of abundance, poverty, and pressure to shut up about benefits. So you've got two realities. The hypothetical reality, and then the data set of reality. And the question is, over time, do those get closer or further apart? And by the time that you're fired in older age as a long-term employee of Concept Synergy, they're getting further apart. The data set and the dogma or the teaching or the words, they're diverging. You're learning that spiritual family doesn't mean a beautiful mass suicide, with the 7 angels singing and this and that. It means being fired without a pension. It means being dissed and forced into a non-disclosure agreement so that nobody knows what happened. In other words, you're a bad smell, and we just want to put you into our shadow. That's what it means when you said we'll all be part of a spiritual family. That's painful, because the gap between hope and aspiration and what's happening is getting bigger over the time, not less. That's painful for the staffers at Concept Synergy. It's painful for the ones that are there, because you cannot help but understand that these things are not personal, which means you're next. Once you've watched Barbara Brennan, Terry Clancy, Bill Brown, all being disposed of, you now know the drill, and your hands are guilty because you were used to carry it out. It's the same tribulation as the Nixium women who were used to seduce other women. The vow, to pledge allegiance, to be blackmailed in. Once you've brought other people in, it becomes much more difficult to feel genuine remorse and sadness for what's been done to you because you've done it to others. Jeffrey Epstein did this with recruiting. He was in Florida. So, Florida has the Trump little island of billionaires, and then it's a very poor state. So you have an incredible imbalance of money and power with a cult that elevates money above human beings. Basically says you have no value if you have no money. But if you have money, then you're valuable. And so what he would do to high school students, often sexually abused, is he would offer them $200 for an illegal sexual massage and or to have sex with him. And then he would tell them to recruit their friends. And he would say, if you will send another girl, without, of course, telling her what to expect, then I'll give you $200 and your friend $200. So you've now become part of a sex trafficking ring for underage girls. And we're not going to explain what this is or isn't. We're going to talk as if this is a great benefit. Now, we don't teach our children, we don't teach our citizens what competency and care and love actually are in schools and otherwise. We teach them that if they have more money, that makes them more important. That's what we teach them. And everyone wants more freedom, more money, more power, more access to resources. Everyone wants that $200 for referring another girl. Maybe 14, maybe 15, maybe 16, maybe 18. Doesn't really matter. All that matters is her body. All that matters is you'll get paid. But how can you grieve your own loss of innocence when you've then brought 7 other girls? You've cleared $1,400 for bringing 7 other girls into that situation. How can you grieve your innocence when you've modeled your shame control protocol around pennies to enable hers, and you've abused and shamed other people? How can you get in touch with the lost innocence, with the disgust, the horror of that, now that you've become an enabler and a co-abuser? It's hard. It's hard to do that because you've got to face 2 griefs simultaneously. You've got to face your own grief and understand in doing so how much you hurt another. It creates schizophrenia when that has nothing to do with the underlying material. To put out a tape on excellence and repeatedly fail at doing things, it produces schizophrenia. Now, if you produce schizophrenia in an employee by this huge gap between dogma and data, that is a disability psychologically. It causes harm. You've got a divided self. Now, that leads to schizophrenic, irrational behavior. And the question is, if that person is then shamed in order to protect the dogma, if you watch the Wild Wild West series, one of the people you might have the most compassion for is the 16-year-old girl who grew up to be the shadow of Rajneesh, Anand Sheila, who grew up to be the shadow of Rajneesh, to be blamed and hated for all of his failings because she did what he said, what he asked, out of innocence, out of love, out of a devotion to what she elevated, not to be the creator of universes, but to be a great teacher. And to have that person, in hate of himself, ask her to commit suicide. It's horrifying. But it is the template. It's the same template with which Leah Remini is being criticized, and which so many Scientology members have had their lives ripped apart. That's what happens. To protect the dogma, LRH can't make any mistakes. LRH never apologizes. All of the shadow side of LRH's infidelities, addictions, insanities, illegal activity, that's all whitewashed. And then anyone who questions LRH, you just write a code in there. And you have to admire Scientology for having a little bit more integrity than Concept Synergy, because they write a code. The contract is visceral. Anyone who questions LRH is the enemy of Scientology. It's pretty simple coding. You have someone does a little thinking, they question LRH, well, simple. We're not going to listen to you because that would cast doubt on the system. We're going to villainize you and punish you until you get the message and either comply or are kicked out of the organization and lose all touch with your family. Well, stonewalling, not honoring decade-long relationships, you're kicked out. Why? Because you questioned the greatest human being who has ever lived, the sole and only channel of the greatest higher being of Lazaris, who couldn't ask for a show of hands a single time in a single workshop. How many of you have seen your lives get elegant and succeed easier than to fail and do this? How many of you have actually done that? Anyone in the whole room? 2 people? Okay. And how many of you are feeling bad because we told you if this isn't happening to you, it's because you've got payoff? Okay. 60% of you? Okay. Could we get that data? Could we look at impact? And could we talk about it? You know, and of course you've got a built-in vertical relationship when in order to talk about it, you have to pay. How many friends do you have to pay? Hey, you know, you really hurt my feelings back there. You made me feel like a complete fool. You confused me. You made me feel like an idiot. I'd like to talk to you about that because our friendship is valuable. Let's see, I don't have an appointment this year, but pay up and we'll fit you in 2 years from now and give you a few moments to say some things. And if it's not enough time, just wait another 2 years and you can bring up your issue then. It's not a very friendly place to resolve issues, and I couldn't figure out how to resolve any of this, and so I just left for a while. But there's something incomplete about that as well. Did I just waste my adolescent years? Is there some good to this? Could we talk about it? Not in the Jach and Lazaris control room, but anywhere else could we talk about it? Well, we'll try and get everyone into NDAs so we can't talk about it there either. So why? All of this creates confusion, shame, seems highly abusive of power. And it has nothing to do with any of the projection or expectation or desire or imagination that I had about what it might be like to work at Concept Synergy. My expectation was that it was 10 times better than I'm hearing. My imagination was that it was 10 times better. My desire, it'd be nice to know that someone actually knows how to figure this out, because then there's hope that I can too. But if Jach can't figure this out, if their very best protocol is stonewalling, was it all bullshit? Did Jach learn nothing? What does Lazaris' friendship mean at a moment like this? Just get lost or pay up? What is that? So, if you understand fractal templates of relationship, you understand that most of them are not personal. People use an algorithm of filtering who's going to get in or who get out. So in this case, you get in if you pay, agree to whatever autocratic things concept synergy comes up with, and you're pro-Lazaris and don't ask questions and just put up with a one-sided monologue relationship. And you're out if you don't. And you're still out if we don't like you for some reason or other, you're out. But is that a healthy contract? Is that a healthy template for any kind of friendship, for any kind of relationship? And if it isn't, do you just get lost and feel foolish? Like, why did I believe that? Or is there any accountability for Jach Pursel, for current members of Concept Synergy enacting his abuse protocols? They all know what Jach wants. He doesn't want to be bothered by any of this. He doesn't want to deal with any criticism. He wants to make his cut. And he wants his life to be easy. And whether that's working or not working for his staff or anyone else, well, then they can leave, and as long as they sign an NDA to be silent about it. But is that really what a human being would learn from embodying 45 years of exposure to Lazaris? About running a company? About caring for staff? About being friends with anyone? Well, if Jach's model for friendship is modeled on Lazaris, and if people aren't paying him money and doing things exactly the way he wants them to do, then they're not friends. But is that a good template? So the why is important because this applies to all of us. The Jach and Lazaris template of relating and all that has been copied by various channels. It has impact. And my belief is that if the data is gathered and presented in an unbiased form, that everyone can make more informed decisions. And my belief is that if Jach is held accountable for the cost of financial exploitation, of misrepresentation of what spiritual family is, then current and past employees will feel more dignified, more valued than they do now. That's my hypothesis. Could we give it a try and actually see a show of hands? How many people feel a little bit more valuable after being paid more? After being able to have their day of speaking without their freedom of speech being censored by Jach Pursel? Do they feel more valuable as a human being than they did before? I'll take that bet. I'll bet anyone $1,000 that more people feel more valuable with that protocol than this. Just ask them. So why is asking somehow beyond Concept Synergy's purview as a synergizing company? Because what's at stake here is the meaning of words. If friend means betrayal, good to know. Let's be clear on what it means. If synergy means ramrod NDAs down long-term abused employees, let's be clear that that's what synergy means. What does it mean? Because it means when you apply words of whatever it is, the manager, magical management team, if that means NDAs, poor salaries, no retirement benefits, and being shut up, well, then we all know to avoid being part of a management magical team, whatever it is. If it actually means more chance to speak your mind, better wages, better training, more honor, more dignity in some form, then we all know that, okay, we want one of those. Concept synergy is setting a map. There are not that many 45-year channelings of a company producing the material of the channel that's touched tens of thousands of lives. So what is it doing with that map? Improving general, relationships in the roles, synergizing, or just using the cover of all those words to hurt people and take no responsibility? Well, that's why I think this coming to light is valuable, positively and negatively. I was really surprised in my 4-hour interview with Bill Brown, because I see positive and negative in my relationship with Lazaris, meaning I have plenty of benefits and plenty of problems. I was really surprised that someone could talk with Lazaris almost every month for decades and couldn't think of a single benefit that came into his life as a result of all those conversations. Well, I can say I didn't see a single benefit to my 30 minutes with Lazaris, and overall it seemed more discombobulating, I think would be the best word, than insightful. But to not notice a single benefit or see a single great attribute about Penny and to have worked there for all that time, that's who is no one tracking that? That just seems like amazing to me. And it's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to see. But in abusive power dynamics, it's the people that get put into the shadow of the family, of the leader, of the teacher, people who get put into the shadow that end up carrying the shame of the organization, of the teacher, of the leader. And so they have the most pain, and they're treated the worst. Now, in grandiose organizations, there are always people of a sycophantic nature who will take the role. And in an unhealthy leader, they will be chosen not for their dignity or the fairness of the agreement. They will be chosen for their sycophantic willingness to suck up and have an abuse contract shoved down their throat. But it takes an unhealthy person to say, sign here. Meaning, if I abuse a woman, and there's plenty of women willing to be abused, I just have to say, who's willing to be abused in this way, this way, this way, and this way, and you can be my lover. And there'll be plenty of hands. And whoever wants to be treated better, well, I'm not interested. Meaning, for this abuse dynamic to go on, there needs to be an abuser who sees nothing wrong with treating someone this way. And there needs to be a victim who sees nothing wrong or nothing wrong enough to leave the dynamic. And usually the people who will connect in an unhealthy contract are the people in the most need, with the most fear, which are people with the highest abuse history. I've dated women who I feel furious because I pay them a compliment and they argue with me. And then they tell me how shitty they are. And I feel furious. It's like, why can't I see your beauty? No, I'm not beautiful. No. People find me very aggravating. I feel furious. And then they tell me, yeah, I'm that way. I'm an annoying person. Just hit me. Now, that's an invitation. And if I want a relationship of constantly putting someone down and abusing them, I can say, okay, fine, you're willing to take that. You're my gal. But if I don't want to do that, if I want to treat you better than average, and you're not interested in being treated better than average, I don't have to hire you. I don't have to give you that role. There'll be plenty of other people who can do that. But I want to find someone who appreciates and rewards me for treating her well, and who puts up a bit of a fight and says, hey, I'm not taking this shit. When I try to unload my shame. That brings out the best in me. And the trouble, whether it's a Rajneesh or a Jach Pursel, is you're going to have people sign up for crappy contracts that are hard for anyone to look at and say, wow, that was a really good step forward for you. But if you're a leader in a company on synergy and metaphysics, don't give someone more than they initially demand for because you believe in it, because you want to treat people well. People have been abused as children. They tried sticking up for their rights at one point, and they were punished for doing so. So then, as all adaptive personalities do, they shift tactics to enabling. I'll take the negative contract, just don't leave me. It's the traumatized child's default position because they can't do it on their own. And we're a nation of children and adolescents on the inside who still don't have our needs met. To be an adult includes, unlike what Lazaris says, we're not your parent, we're not this. If someone is a traumatized child and you insist on treating them like a competent adult, you're a moron, because they're not. You've got to have that discernment. And if you're kind and willing, you take a leadership role of nurturing and tracking their survival, their security, their love and belonging, their self-esteem, their growing of their gifts and abilities, they're bringing those abundantly out into the world, becoming a part of something more. I don't know exactly how much self-esteem is possible in a shame-based employee environment. I don't know how much you can develop your gifts when it's all about do what I want here and just following those whims. And bringing your gifts abundantly into the world and being paid well, that doesn't appear to be happening. And the question is, why not? If Lazaris came to talk to Penny, and Penny's this wonderful person, why not? Why did all of Lazaris's love not heal those wounds? Well, they haven't healed them in me. And they didn't heal them in my 20-year partner with Alicia. They haven't healed those wounds in Alicia. They haven't healed them in me. They don't seem to have healed them in Jach or Penny. Now, a good, competent relational partner does heal many of those wounds by being, when they're in a childlike dynamic of regression, being a nurturing parent within and without. And someone grows up a little bit more inside the relationship. And we grow up a little bit more inside the relationship. So it does happen. But if it's not happening with Lazaris, because Lazaris, Robert Bly in the Sibling Society makes an excellent case for the fact that we are a culture of children and adolescents who desperately need elders, parents, initiation, and to know what an adult is. How can you do that if you've never met one? If you've never experienced adult love? Someone who will fight for your value. If your parents, in fact, attacked you for having value, for saying, hey, don't hit me, and then your parents hit you harder, and then you basically learned that defending your own dignity could get you killed, so you stop doing it. And then you never meet a competent adult who's willing to fight for you? How do you learn viscerally the template of your value? And how can you learn that from Lazaris if he won't take a stand for his staff, for his friends? You don't learn it. You need at least one template. So it's very sad. And I think it's worth exploring. I think it's worth understanding. So that's why. That's why this project is worthy of my attention, of my time, worthy of your time, because it's not personal. This is a fractal pattern that's happening over and over and over again. And the success rate is relatively low, the pain rate and shame rate is relatively high, so it's not a good model. But you can't make a good model until you understand the flaws of the old model. So that's why.